Well, first off, I just want to say that the stimulus program in the Obama administration, 2009, has a lot of flaws in it. But the green component was by far the most ambitious investment in building a green economy that has ever happened in the United States. With all of its flaws, and there were a lot of flaws, and I should say right off that I was actually consulting in the Energy Department on implementation, so I know a lot about the flaws. But it was $100 billion. Okay, now, the $100 billion did not get spent, and this, Elaine's point is very, very important here, because $75 billion of the $100 billion was for various incentive programs for state and local governments and private businesses. And most of that money, to my total utter frustration, sat there and then finally got taken away because it wasn't getting spent. Now, if we had had the kind of movement in local communities that Elaine was talking about, people would have known that there are these massive pots of money sitting there to do all kinds of green things, and they would have mobilized around getting that money and actually making this project happen. I mean, we have to say, I think, fairly, that in that one moment in historic time, the Obama administration delivered what you would want a presidential administration to do. They delivered $100 billion for a green agenda. It did not happen. I know, again, from firsthand, it didn't happen, but it could happen again, but we definitely need exactly the kind of movement that Elaine was describing.
Why didn't big capital pick it up?
Okay, why didn't they did pick it up to some extent. Part of the problem is, which also gets to your question, you know, we went from $2 billion to $100 billion. It was $2 billion under Bush to $100 billion. So, you know, this stuff is all really just, even if you're totally greedy capitalist.
Bottlenecks.
Yeah. It's like we don't have the, that's why I emphasize, it's not that I'm against public financing, but, you know, private financing will work faster if you mobilize the infrastructure. And that's exactly what also the kind of thing that Elaine was talking about. And I'm not talking about like all big corporations here, but to your point, when you look at the energy sector around the world, there actually are a lot of different property forms. More so than any other big sector. I mean, you have huge public utilities. I mean, the city of Los Angeles, right? The second biggest city in the whole country is run by an entirely public utility. And there are progressive moves. The Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy is working actively and organizing around that. And so there are, and in Europe, in Western Europe, you have community-owned wind farms. You actually have them in the Midwest, in the United States. You have cooperative wind farms, you have community-owned wind farms. Now, to build those up will take a movement. Now, what about the issue of capital accumulation and cost competitiveness? No, I mean, yeah, I know there's, I really respect the work of Tim Jackson and Peter Victor, who work at, some of you may know the work of Prosperity Without Growth, but I do disagree with them. In that, building a green economy over the next 25 years is a massive job, right? I don't know if it's going to make GDP go up or down, but actually who cares if GDP, but that's the essence of why I'm showing all these jobs. It's a lot of work to go, if we really are talking about going from a fossil fuel-based economy to a green economy, we can't say that we are going to dematerialize. We are going to transform the process of material production to a green one. That's the only way that we're going to get there. And so it's going to create a lot of jobs. There will be opportunities for private businesses, but there will also be big opportunities for public works and public businesses. And for example, under the Bush administration, a law was passed that by 2015, 75% of all federal government-owned buildings have to be retrofitted to save 35% at least, on energy. Another example, people don't even know about it. I didn't even know about it, and I was working in the energy. I read about it like online. And, but, you know, again, this would be the kind of thing that community movements could say, well, what about City Hall right here? You know, we're not even following the law that was passed by the Republicans. So anyway, those are my thoughts for the moment.
On the labor perspective, Greg mentioned this NUPG, National Union of Provincial and Government Employees in Canada. And I know the story very well because I worked with them. And even got the jacket to show it. What happened is this was just some environmentalists who happened to be public employees. But, you know, as union members, the vast majority of union members don't identify themselves as union members. They're just normal people. And these normal people's real interest was the environment. And suddenly, they all of a sudden realized what being a unionist is about. It's about taking that agenda and broadening it, that the environment should be a union agenda. And it occurred to them as environmentalists to bring their passion and their cause into the union and grow the union agenda to include their cause. And when they did that, they were able to persuade other folks in the union to start to, they developed a couple of booklets that were then given out to all the stewards, etc., about not only how to start to influence a green agenda in your public sector workplace. And they did talks to the locals of this union, and before long, because it's part of a national union, they used their power to sort of say, hey, national union, we should be doing some of this stuff. And it just has moved. Now it's fairly easy because they're public employees as opposed to private sector miners or a group I used to do a lot of work with, woodworkers. Never saw a tree they didn't want it down. But part of it is it's getting the agenda beyond, not letting the big picture be so big and overwhelming that we then figure that nothing can be done. Let me give you an LA example that's pretty incredible. Because public sector, another public sector. I mean, you may not know this, but the LA police, by the way, are now on a 4-day schedule. Why are they on a 4-day schedule? Well, they want it to be. And they want it to be for a long time. Anybody who's driven in LA, you need your head examined. So a lot of these folks have to drive to the job. They tried to bargain with the city for years to move to 4/10. The city absolutely refused. And one day, some of their bicycle patrol folks ran into a bunch of bicycle activists in the city of LA. And they got talking about how shitty it was that they couldn't get the city to drop them from 5 days to 4 days. The bicyclists said, well, you know, we're involved in environmental stuff, you know. So the Crunchy Granolas and the LA Police Protective Association got together, and they were able to use that power to change, in fact, and to come to the police and help the police win City Hall to changing the work schedule to reduce the amount of driving that police have to do in order to get to their job. Now, you know, for a lot of us socialists, you know, oh, geez, what are you doing here? But I'm telling you, the climate agenda will give us very, very strange coalitions. But it won't work unless we start to try and actually build them. And to start to, because I would say that the vast majority of working folks at this point, maybe, you know, if you look at the polls, you know, are you worried about, you know, climate change? Yeah, sure. Are you going to do anything about it? Absolutely not. And so it's part of the transformation is transforming things like our unions so that they make the broader agenda part of their agenda. But the way to do that is not from, in my opinion, from the very top, but it's actually following the model of the living wage, following the model of trying to figure out how to do it locally, And by doing it, we're training ourselves and teaching others and building the powerful coalition that we're going to need to do that.
I want to ask the two speakers who are about to comment, since both of you I know have done a lot of thinking about the limits of localism, how you would relate the kind of local coalition building that Elaine was talking about to the perspective you have.
That's good.
I'll do it simultaneously. Yeah, I'm going to answer a variety of things in heading that way. I'll accept the qualifications from both Bob and Eric, and I would, on the Council of Canadians has been one of the key national groups that have kind of offered alternative approaches on ecological issues, that largely in difficult circumstances. I think Quebec, I should have qualified, Quebec partly has been moving at the level of oppositional politics in a different way. The successful blockage of fracking right now, and some of the green agenda that came out of Quebec Solidaire in its movement to a new platform over the last years, also in terms of North America, a very positive development with a wide range of social forces behind it. The difficulty then, I don't think Quebec at the level of the Quebec state with the new agenda that Charest has been trumping, and he was in at the International Mining Conference at Toronto last week, and he was appalling. And the amount of territory he wants to bring into production, and the expansion of the hydro sector in northern Quebec to feed energy needs in the U.S. is astonishing. It's a bit different there. I want to qualify a couple of points vis-a-vis Bob. The other case that we had very positive expenditures in the stimulus package was the province of Ontario, which laid out a huge amount also in alternative energy strategy. It might actually have been more than as a percentage of GDP than the Obama case. The difficulty has been then, as austerities hit, they're not able to sustain this anymore. So we built a lot of production capacity in the auto plants, say, that have moved to the American south of Mexico, that were left idle on Windsor and other places, and we built some wind and solar production capacity there. The problem is the market is not deep enough. They're requiring still subsidies. And now, Ontario, which was historically, because of Niagara Falls and a few other cases, was, along with Quebec, the low energy cost region of North America, which then subsidized the major expansion, the out of proportion expansion of the auto sector in Ontario. So it was the biggest center of auto production in North America, if not the world, for a period. And that's gone. Now, because our nuke structures are so out of proportion in terms of cost, and the wind and solar production that they put in place is also proportionally out of cost, and we don't have the tax extractive capacity to subsidize these. So therefore, the cost production of the Canadian manufacturing, in the Ontario manufacturing sector, has really struggled right now. And it's the reason for a huge shift out of productive capacity in Ontario to the U.S. South and other places. I think it raises the, I think also in alongside
the exchange rate.
Yeah, the exchange rate too from the tar sands production and the focus on energy, it makes it compounds these problems. So you're having a double blow. I think one also has to take seriously in terms of the dematerialization problems of capitalism, also vis-a-vis the forecasts that have come out of both the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Stern Commission, which suggest a range of issues that we're beyond where we should be. It's difficult to see us reversing this, and X, Y, Z climate issues are there. I think those are real constraints that of not also introducing systematically the question of needs in an alternative. I have nothing against the kind of general, this is clearly absolutely something that the left should be pushing for that in that way, but it also raises this question of thinking about needs. Fourth, on Eric's point on the socialized property, I think I would just add, I think that's partly where you do also need extra local capacities. And one of the things that we should have been able to win, especially in Canada and especially in Quebec during the financial crisis, was the movement of specialized banks focused on this sector, focused at both, and we lost that. And it's so tragic in Quebec because you had the case in this capacity that was built into the Quebec state that is gone. And that was a moment, you know, if Quebec Solidaire was a little bit more, we could have made the case, and the case could have then been, you know, again, a place where you could have funded those local things and the wider energy alternative. I don't know how we can fund all these things without also those extra market capacities to generalize them. I agree that the state of politics we're at right now means that we have to do the things that Elaine's speaking about to build those kind of coalitions. But it does raise this other question of these capacities. The Quebec case was so striking of what we could have done differently, which raises, I think, the problem of the extractive industries. I think in the extractive industries, we know two things that we need to do. We know when we have the thinking about labor market adjustment strategies and the way to kind of move workers from one zone to another and the kinds of training, we have the technical capacities. Neoliberalism has gutted them in the state sector often, so we don't have the administrative capacities, but we know what has to be done. And similarly, as Bob was laying out, that we have, Jeremy, we have much of the thinking that's necessary to move from one kind of energy production to another. The difficulty is winning it. I think we have been able to do things on the ground in particular coalitions in cases of wanting workers in dirty industries, you know, wanting to address them. If you do the work, we have won some of these, in fact, in the battles over the tar sands. You know, you can win them. And the issue for workers particularly is that the employment question, not so much sticking to a particular kind of job, but we have this, that again, I think, has to have extra market or extra local economic and political conditions to undertake. The final point I'll make is this. At the international level, we have had some positive developments occurring among coalitions. The World Social Forum just finished a couple months ago, and there was a very good statement that came out of that from the environmental movements on the question of green jobs and climate change. It was a pretty good statement and has been moving. It followed on the work that has been going on for a decade in and around since the Durban Declaration in the critique of the Kyoto Accord through a lot of international meetings and structures that developed a very good critique of some of those international mechanisms and the Clean Development Mechanism Fund and so on and how they might change. And you have a few states, notably Bolivia, leading some of these challenges at the level of interstate bargaining. The difficulty is in the interstate system, what's occurred right now is we have the worst features of neoliberalism being reinforced and more authoritarian neoliberalism forming. So it is kind of moving in the opposite direction, you know, which speaks to a political question that can't be avoided. And that is, you know, central to being able to put forward, you know, and accomplish many of the things that, whatever our angle, and particularly angle of departure, putting those in motion.
First, let me say the bargaining guide, Cool Comforts, that's been referred to, is up on the website of my organization, which is Labor number 4 Sustainability. So just put in a search for Cool Comfort. Something that might be good before we leave is anybody who's got websites where people can follow up on some of the specific things that are being talked about, like what you're doing in Toronto, like things that, I'm not sure what the mechanics is here, but
There's one work site at New York University because of a project called Work in a Warming World, which has like 1,000 or 1,500 references of all the literature that exists.
Why don't you give us the
I just know the name. If you Work in a Warming World,
Work in
get
a
into
Warming
it.
World, okay.
York University.
Also the training manual.
Yeah, Elaine's probably more involved in it than I have.
Training jobs versus the environment.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very good stuff.
Okay. So, yes.
I'm just going to ask, is your paper published online, or is it published in a journal somewhere that we could, or is it?
Well, there's different versions, yeah. If you go to our institute, Political Economy Research Institute,
Okay.
we have a lot of
Also, I'm going to ask all
Tell
the
you
4
what,
speakers to give us something in writing and that can be videotaped.
You want a website? I'll give you a website.
Yeah.
It's my son and I, solarutopia.org. Harvey Washington is Solartopia. We put the U in. It has a model, global solarization, and a lot more, mathematical models, so check it out.
Yeah, I know it. That's
I probably should go on, but, can we write stuff up here, or is there no? Okay. We need a way to share. Why don't you think
Well,
about it? You're sending out
I've got
Give things to Joanne, and she should can include them in the write-up from this session.
Yeah, I really want to give Jeremy a
yeah.
chance to.
So,
to
yeah,
answer
let
the other
me-
speakers
so-
to take notes.
I'll be quick, but I think, what?
You want to mark?
No.
No, that's okay. I agree totally with what Elaine said, and in my community I work on, in Connecticut, I work on trying to make alliances of exactly the kind you described, and Labor Network for Sustainability is involved in that kind of thing. So I totally agree with what you said. However, I think we have to ask the question, why is there no left alternative to neoliberalism? And I believe that the core reason is because there is no transnational program and there is no solution within we can do stuff, we can improve things, but there is no solution within a national framework. And so my remarks are not addressed to what we should be doing in our own local communities with the global stuff in our heads, but doing what we need to do locally. My discussion about a global jobs program and global alternative is really addressed to the problems of left parties, which even not only the social democratic parties, but the green parties and the former communist parties, the, so to speak, left parties, all have this problem of not really having a transnational, global alternative, and therefore when they get in power, the best of them still end up turning to a neoliberal program, because what's the alternative? If you're in Greece, what's the alternative? If you're in, okay, and we don't have a party like that in the United States, so it's irrelevant here, but in terms of the rest of the world, I think that that is something that's got to be thought through. I mean, you got to think in terms of a transnational economic strategy like the stuff I was talking about from the 30s, in order to get out of the box we're in of having no choice between national retreat and accepting neoliberalism as a global policy. Okay, that's one. And as far as the question of property, the property dimension, which I think is a great question and a very good way to frame the question. First of all, I completely agree with Bob that the diversity, let 1,000 flowers bloom. But I think that, if you look at it historically, Keynesianism and those kinds of approaches are always inherently ambiguous in terms of the type of property system that flows from them. But that makes that's a long way ahead of where liberalism, neoliberalism, and all the capitalist plans are. So my idea of a strategy is you go for the kind of thing that Bob is talking about, the kind of Keynesian strategy, whatever you want to call it, but public or publicly mobilized investment, and then you fight for what your vision of that should be, that it doesn't all go back into the hands of private entrepreneurs, but that it's captured and made into some kind of thing that ordinary folks can control. I think the best place to have that struggle is in a situation where you have public institutions trying to respond to needs. And climate is today the overwhelming need, and that's the last thing I want to comment on, which is if we created a political situation in which the need to protect the climate was accepted as an absolute necessity, which it is an existential necessity for the survival of everything that all people on Earth today care about. If we had that as a core driving political orientation, then we could say, let's try everything. You know, if the subsidies are fine, I personally think even cap and trade, which I hate, is something that should be, but it should be done nonetheless because it's one piece of addressing climate. But much bigger part is climate transferring, public works, and so on. But the core thing is if the parts that like Stern and people like that are willing to do don't work if it's defined as an absolute political necessity, absolute human necessity. That is the best possible context for us to say, they can't do it, and so we have to do it our way.
We have about, if we have about 450, it's now 4:43. Are there any women who have their hands up? Okay.
I'll put my hand up. Not really a question, but more of an announcement, since we can't write on the board.
You can write on it.
Okay. Well, in response to the gentleman over there, so I work with Align, which is the New York chapter of both Jobs with Justice and the Blue Green Alliance. And we'd be happy to make a presentation at your union about the ways that labor and environmental groups can work together on local campaigns that build a more just and sustainable city and state in New York. So there are several, really exciting initiatives that are fairly local, but I'm available for questions after the session.
And who has the sign-up lists?
I do.
Get both of them?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyone who has a suggestion about what should be sent to everyone, write this down. This is, or it's on the flyer here. Our email is CPD, for Campaign for Peace and Democracy, at igc.org. So within reason, we'll send that information to all of you. Okay.
Yeah, this is in response to what Jeremy just said earlier.
What's your name?
Jerry Epstein. I really don't think you're right about this argument about we need a global solution from a Keynesian perspective. Clearly, we need some kind of global solution in terms of the greenhouse gases, and that's clear. But in terms of the economics of it, I just don't think that's true. First of all, let's take the case of Greece. It's part of the European Union. The European Union is large enough that if it got rid of its neoliberal structure and policies and adopted a more Keynesian approach, it has plenty of opportunity to generate employment and restructure its economy. The problem, of course, is that the European Union has adopted a neoliberal structure. If you look at the United States is large enough in the world economy to make lots of the kinds of adjustments that Bob and others have been talking about. We're now able to borrow abroad at almost 0%. We don't have a debt problem or a deficit problem, at least not in the medium term. So the kind of problems you're talking about there don't apply. There are regional groupings in Latin America that can cooperate along the same lines. China's big enough to change, and is doing all kinds of work along these lines. And even small countries, where I think your argument mostly applies, can do a lot more to cut themselves off from the speculative international financial markets through capital controls and so forth. So clearly what you said applies more to smaller countries than to larger groupings of countries or larger countries, but even there's things that can be done. So I don't really think your argument is correct in our current juncture.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm sorry, I'm not going to call it any more people, but we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to give you a chance to answer, and 3 of you any last minutes.
It's a very reasonable argument that you're making, and I wouldn't take it. I would say that there's the larger the area that is, and the more isolated the economic unit, regional unit, the more opportunity there is to do that. What I would say is that the dynamic where does neoliberalism come from? Why is neoliberalism so dominant? It's not just because capitalists love neoliberalism. They used to love Keynesianism. They used to love public intervention and regulation. It came because the process of globalization created a dynamic in which at least they believe that a strategy of lowering costs in order to be competitive is the strategy for their success and their aggrandizement. And the left has no answer to that, has not had any answer to that. Why the left it's complicated because what you've done is to say let's look at larger regional units like the EU. What you're saying could be done better for the EU than it could be done for any country within it. But in fact, the left of the EU has not developed the strategy of the kind you're talking about. So I would accept your comment, but my comment goes specifically to the failure of the left in the EU to develop a real international strategy, even for the EU. I also think that the global competition between the major units, like China and the United States, let's just take China and the United States, the political resistance, I think that Bob Haaland's plan could be implemented in the United States without it having a major actual effect on the economic competition between the United States and China. It might even be beneficial from a rational point of view. But the dynamic and the mentality that says this can we can't do this because we have to be competitive vis-a-vis the Chinese is very, very powerful. And that the key to breaking it is, the key to breaking that is to have some joint kind of approach, like what I was talking about, that says, no, we can have a win-win situation with this.
Okay, 1 minute for each of the three.
Any first? Let's go in order. I think the financial crisis has reinforced neoliberalism. I think a more authoritarian form of neoliberalism, in fact. It's a political question. And I think the climate change and the range of the environmental things are in fact reinforcing that authoritarianism in the state structures and not opening the space. As much as I like much of the analysis that was in Naomi Klein's article in The Nation on this, I don't think she's right on that aspect of it, not the alternatives that she put forward, but that aspect quite easily can reinforce neoliberalism. I think this is not a question to essentialize scale, you know, either local or national. All human production, particularly capitalist production, articulates across different scales, and you can't essentialize anyone. You essentialize it in thinking mainly because of the accumulative dynamic and the level which political struggles are forming at. At this moment in time, I do think that's an articulation at the local level in the sense that this is where a lot of struggles have to emerge, but they can't be addressed at that level. They have to be extra local, extra market, and to some extent extra national, but the national remains crucial. I think that puts on the demand, which we can't leave out of questions of climate justice, the traditional demands for the left, which must be not only there, but articulated through the problems that exist in and around climate change.
I also believe that the crisis has strengthened neoliberalism, but that's at least part of the reason why what you see is labor is still very, very reluctant to, basically it's spending a lot of time trying to just protect and hold on to what it's got. And frankly, that's a death strategy. And what I like about the environmental movement and the linkage with it is that it starts to break out of that, and it forces, because we're not going to be able to transform without labor. But labor has to believe, and by that I mean just working people, have to believe it's possible. And to believe that it's possible, starts with small steps, not huge steps. And so part of this is about how do you start the fight back, and the fight back really needs to start at the local level. It needs to start, in my opinion, with very small steps. That you start saying to folks, as we used to do, I used to teach in the area of technological change, and one of the things we used to do is we'd tell people, no matter how threatening it was, we'd say, no, you don't really understand it, because let me tell you, it's worse than that. And eventually you convince people not to bother struggling. And so I think part of what we've got to do is be honest about the massiveness of the crisis, but then to get people moving, we've got to be able to supply some things that they can do to make a difference.
But in Greece and Portugal, this is a national question now, not so much a local. It's the national program you gather political forces around, I think.
Okay, I just want to give Robert.
In North America, it's local.
Whoa, whoa. Robert?
Okay, well, thanks everyone for a great session. I'll just make a couple of points that maybe are related to neoliberalism and a Green New Deal, which is on financing. Just to mention the fact, the commercial banks in the United States at present are sitting on $1 trillion in cash reserves, 10% of U.S. GDP that they got for free because of the zero interest rate policy at the Fed. And the one thing that we can think about in reviving a Green New Deal agenda is to put some demands on the banks because they have gotten these incredible reserves. And Bernanke has said he's going to keep the zero interest rate policy at least through 2014. I had some friends, some colleagues in Britain that we were talking about writing something called a green quantitative easing. So you would have the stimulus, but it would go to the kinds of green investment agenda, and then you can start thinking about a serious alternative to neoliberalism. I mean, I don't think it's hard, and I don't think neoliberalism is actually doing so hot. Yes, it got, there was this Keynesian moment, and then we're back to austerity, but we all know it cannot work. It can't work on any dimension. And so that as long as we keep fighting and coming up with alternatives, I think neoliberalism is going to be defeatable. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank all the panelists.